And he's going to give us a presentation on pedestrian, bicycle, and driver safety. Mr. Edmondson.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
A little bit about myself. I work for the University of South Florida. I work under the Florida Department of Transportation grants. 30 years in law enforcement. Prior to this, I worked as a sergeant on one of the PD. So my whole background throughout my career has been around traffic safety in general, traffic homicide. And for years, I always wanted to see some changes in behavior as well as rules and regulations and compliance through traffic regulations. So this is a presentation that's really critical here in Tampa Bay because, as some of you may not know, Tampa Bay is not only one of the highest in population, 150 people moving here a day to the Tampa Bay area, but we're number one in the nation in killing pedestrians. Right? We have been for several years. As you can see, just this weekend there were some bad crashes. Constantly you can monitor the news and see some sort of pedestrian or bicycle related accident resulting in serious injuries or death. So this is an interactive presentation. Everybody should have a clicker. If you don't have a clicker, please raise your hand. I got a whole box of them. Okay?
I thought we were going to share. She needs it.
So it's an interactive presentation. Some questions are going to pop up on the screen. It's meant to be fun, to not really get an idea to see what you know at this point. Okay? I won't know how you respond, neither will your neighbor in the room here. Okay? So we're going to kind of get an idea, see if you know the rules and regulations of the road as they exist here today in Florida. We'll have fun with it. We'll talk about the subject matter, and we'll post us at the end. Okay? You need another clicker?
No, do I have to turn it on?
You don't need to do anything. Here's what's going to happen. The question will pop up on the screen, and you'll respond with 1 through 9. When you push the button, a little green light will come on. Now, you'll have to wait until my polling opens up, and you'll get a number and a letter. It'll say 1A, 2B, 3C, 4D, and so on. Okay, and then once we get everybody's answers, it will populate a bar graph. Give us an idea where the answers are in the room, okay? We'll talk about the subject matter. We'll clarify the rules and the regulations of the road. And we'll answer any questions you guys have, okay? So we'll get started. Here's the first question. How do you travel most often? So if you drive to most destinations, you press 1. If you walk to most destinations, 2, bicyclist is 3, bus or transit is 4, and so on. So if you could go ahead and respond with how you mostly travel.
Question on number 7, if it's the couple typically goes together, is that number 7?
No, that would be a ride share if you're going, like if you're meeting somebody else and driving to
So
Tampa
even if
for
we
work.
drive as a couple most
would be
places,
number 1, drive
it's still
alone.
number 1.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so here's everybody has responded. So here's what we have. A lot of drivers in this room, not a lot of pedestrians or bicyclists, but drivers have certain responsibilities in respect to pedestrians and bicyclists as well. We'll talk about your responsibilities, but we're going to focus a lot on the laws that surround around pedestrians and bicyclists because what we've learned is that most pedestrians and most bicyclists don't know the rules of the road. Most bicyclists only know a handful of the regulations. There's 18 subsections to the statute, laws that they're required to know. They only know typically 4 or 5. It's the other 10 or 12 they don't know, the ones that get them into the code on the street. Okay? We'll talk about some of those responsibilities, how they apply to you as well. So, this is an opinionated question. How safe do you feel this community is for walking? For example, if you're out walking in the mornings or in the evenings in your neighborhood or along Belcher Road, how safe do you personally feel this community is for walking? If you think it's very safe, press number 1. 2 is somewhat safe, 3, somewhat unsafe, or 4, variance. If you're getting a circle with a line through it on that little box, just raise your hand. Let me go get a chance to respond. I'm waiting for a couple more responses. Okay. All right, so 11% feel it's very safe. 42% say somewhat safe. 42% say somewhat unsafe. And then the remainder say very unsafe. Does anybody care to tell us what makes them feel safe or unsafe out there on the streets when you walk?
Were those numbers from us?
Yes.
Okay.
Anyone care to share?
There's a lot of streets without any sidewalks. You gotta walk on the street.
Okay. A lot of sidewalks that aren't contiguous, so they'll start on one side and they'll just abruptly end, and they don't pick up for another mile. Yes, sir.
What I noticed today, in fact, twice, is even though the crossing light is on, cars just zip right through, and a bicyclist almost got hit right in front of us today.
Very common. We're gonna talk about that one.
My nemesis is bicycling. I will not walk on in Edgewater Park on weekends, and when I do, I wear headphones and carry a cane. I can't hear you. I am not gonna jump out of your way if I could.
So you're talking about as a pedestrian sharing the sidewalk with a bicyclist.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk about their responsibilities to you when you're walking.
That's what I try to tell them.
Right on red, I find terrible for pedestrians.
Yes. We're gonna talk about that statistic as well.
Running through stop signs too, running through red
Running
lights.
through stop signs. California roll stop, right? Clearwater PD can tell you all about that. Anyone else?
People texting while they're driving, still goes on.
Distractions,
Oh, yeah.
huge factor today. As a matter of fact, we're having to build cars today to adapt to human behavior. We have to design cars today that have collision avoidance, lane departure, and all these different features because we know drivers are distracted doing other things, so we have to build cars safer. So, yes, distractions is a huge factor, and it doesn't just affect drivers, it affects pedestrians, and it affects bicyclists, motorcyclists as well. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So, here's your first question. Which way should you walk when there aren't sidewalks along the roadway? So, you're on a roadway, there are no sidewalks, you're forced to walk along the roadway. Which direction by law are you required to walk? You walk facing traffic? Number two, do you walk in the same direction as traffic? Or press number 3 if you don't know. 1, 2, or 3?
Give another,
Do we need another clicker back there?
yeah.
Sure.
Do you have another one here for this one?
Yes.
So you take this and start from the end.
Give me a second, go ahead and respond. Okay, 71% say walk facing traffic, and that is the correct answer. Believe it or not, I do high school presentations, I do all the homeless shelters, the VA hospitals. I do pop-up education roadside, just questioning and talking to pedestrians and bicyclists. I've been recently spending a lot of time at Belcher and Gulf to Bay, because it's a high fatal corridor for Clearwater PD, 3 fatalities in a 2-month span out there. So the average is 5 to 28%. Get this question correct. Most pedestrians walk in the roadway with their backs to traffic. As a matter of fact, there was a crash just this weekend that made Bay News 9, I believe. They were talking about a mother who was walking with her back to traffic. And the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office pointed out that she was at fault in the crash, but the driver didn't have insurance. But, you know, we shouldn't be so quick to just jump to all those conclusions until an investigation is complete, because drivers have a certain responsibility too. I asked the question this: how would a driver not see someone whether they're walking facing traffic or with their backs to traffic? The reason why the law creates that pedestrians are required to face traffic is because if you're walking with your back to traffic, think about cars today like the hybrid Tesla or the Toyota Prius. At 30 miles per hour, you'll never hear that vehicle coming up behind you. We're not born with eyes in the back of our head. Naturally, you won't see that vehicle. So facing traffic, put some responsibility back on the pedestrian. If you're facing traffic, let me show you where we're talking about here. If you're facing traffic, as cars are approaching you, they're not slowing down or they're not moving over, perhaps they are distracted. It gives you the ability, the opportunity to step out of the path of that vehicle and do something to change what could be the outcome of a crash with serious injuries or fatality. And if most pedestrians don't know this law correctly and they walk with their backs to traffic, we see so many people that are seriously injured or killed as a result of this. So this is just one of those basic laws. If we could convince everyone or educate everyone that this is the safest way to walk along a roadway. But I agree, sidewalks, if they're contiguous, are the safest place and the legal place for all pedestrians to walk. All right? Crosswalks. These are throughout the Tampa Bay area. They spend millions of dollars in infrastructure designing crosswalks at intersections because it's the safest and legal location for pedestrians to cross. It's what gives them the right way to cross the roadway. But you as drivers under subsection 5 have a duty to avoid a collision with a pedestrian. Just because somebody may be jaywalking doesn't give you the right to accelerate or on their motor, okay? You have to do something to avoid that collision. Hit your brakes, take some sort of evasive maneuver, because it's part of the statute that says all pedestrians have the right of way and drivers have to yield to them, okay? But we know jaywalking, #1 cause of pedestrian-related deaths, crossing mid-block outside of these marked crosswalks. But crosswalks, as somebody mentioned earlier, right turns at intersections are a red light. We'll talk about it a little bit more here in a minute. But crosswalks is where pedestrians are legally supposed to cross the roadway under a walk signal. That's what gives them the right of way, right? And we have a lot of advanced crosswalks here. Clearwater has a lot of high emphasis crosswalks, these grid pattern ones with LED lighting, countdown signals, audible chirpers, really high tech stuff to keep pedestrians safe to get them across the roadways, if they'll use them. Okay, we know that they don't always use it. These rapid flashing beacons, very common here in Clearwater, as well as the entire stretch of Gulf Boulevard, okay? They're pedestrian activated devices, so the pedestrian is required to push the button. As drivers, you're required to come to a complete stop, not yield, but you're required to stop at that stop bar. And there's always signs that post your requirements. Those 2 yellow lights flash in a rapid succession. After you've come to a complete stop, there's no longer a pedestrian on that leg of the roadway. You can proceed with caution, okay? That's how you approach these crossing signals. Now the newest one is coming out, it's called a hawk. We'll talk about that in a second. Can a driver be ticketed for failing to yield to a pedestrian in a marked crosswalk?
She needs
Can a driver be ticketed for failing to yield to a pedestrian in a marked crosswalk? Marked crosswalk like we just saw. All right, 90% got this correct. It is true. As a matter of fact, the state of Florida changed not only the fines and penalties, but there's additional school requirement for that. So it's a $166 fine. It's a moving violation. Points on your license, mandatory school for failing to yield to a pedestrian or marked crosswalk. Now, if there's a crash, it's an additional point associated with that citation. So it's additional points, mandatory school, and a $166 fine. Your insurance company will recognize this, recognize you as a high-risk driver for striking a pedestrian in a marked crosswalk. Vulnerable roadway users, insurance companies pay out millions of dollars in claims every year to pedestrians and bicyclists who are hit, seriously injured, and killed on the roadways. And it's a way for them to recoup some of their losses. They identify you as a high-risk driver. So it's not just a simple 7 miles or 8 mile an hour speeding ticket over the speed limit. It's hitting pedestrian in a marked crosswalk, okay? And failing to yield to them falls just short of the accident that we just talked about, all right? So you are required to stop and yield to those pedestrians. We see this quite a bit. Drivers that block crosswalks. And I'm sure there's a few of us, including myself, sometimes if you're not focused on where you're at, sometimes you can get yourself caught in a situation where you're blocking a crosswalk. You thought you could proceed, the car in front of you stops. Now you find that you're blocking the crosswalk. The location where we're telling pedestrians they need to cross, and it's the safest location for them. But we're telling pedestrians as well, if you approach an intersection and a crosswalk is blocked like this, please don't step out in front of the car, because if the car is blocking the crosswalk, you think they're paying attention to the surroundings in front of them, okay? So we're trying to educate pedestrians, don't ever step out in front of a car that's blocking the crosswalk, always walk behind that vehicle or wait for that crosswalk to clear. And the fine amounts here in Pinellas for pedestrian violations, could be jaywalking, could be crossing against a don't walk signal, $62.50, and motorist fines are $166, okay? They differ from Pasco County slightly, and Hillsborough County a little bit less. All right? So some important tips to remember. If you walk at night or early in the morning, wear bright clothing, reflective material. Something as simple as a t-shirt, bright in color, will stand out a lot better than a dark sweatshirt, okay? Or reflective material, markings on your tennis shoes or backpacks. Being safe is a matter of being seen. So being visible, because 70% of the pedestrian crashes occur at night, okay? It's difficult to see pedestrians. How many have ever come up through a neighborhood, approaching, see a sidewalk, and a pedestrian suddenly steps out in front of you wearing dark clothing? You don't see him, there's no street lights. You know? We all experience this, okay? So it's difficult. But you bear the responsibility to always look for those pedestrians, because they have the right of way when they're walking along the sidewalk and they suddenly cross the roadway. Distractions. Not only can drivers be distracted, but pedestrians as well. Just because you're in a crosswalk, just because you have a walk signal, does not relieve you from looking to ensure that this car comes to a complete stop before you step off the curb. So many people, when they walk up to these rapid flashing beacons, those mid-block crossings, they push the button, they just start walking.
Yep.
But what they don't know is those are battery operated, solar powered. So if we haven't had sunshine in 3 days, and it's a high used crosswalk, those lights may not work. So never step off the curb. Always want to maintain that eye contact before stepping off the curb, and don't allow distractions to interfere with you. That game Pokemon Go that came out several years ago changed the dynamics of these crashes with pedestrians. They were so focused playing this game on their cell phones, stepping out in front of cars, and dying in large numbers. Okay? Still an issue today, distractions. Looking left, right, and left again when crossing a roadway, always looking for that car that's turning right. Can you legally turn right at a red light at an intersection? Unless there's a sign that prohibits you from doing that. And what is the legal process to do it? You come to a complete stop, right? And after you come to a complete stop, what do? You yield the right of way. The process of yielding is looking left, right, and left again. Okay? Do you think most drivers do that when they approach the red light? They're focused on that traffic approaching from the left. They're looking for a gap in traffic, and when they see it, do they pause momentarily, look back to the right to ensure the crosswalk's clear, or do they just accelerate? They typically just accelerate, and they forget about that pedestrian who's walking, crossing that roadway. Another thing to be concerned with or looking for is all these different unknowns when crossing multiple lanes on higher speed roadways. Gulf to Bay Boulevard, okay, perfect example, 6 lanes. There's a lot of activity. There's a lot of businesses, ingress, egress, business access. There's red light cameras. There's a lot of traffic signals. So there's a lot of traffic. There's a lot of lanes. There's a lot of crosswalks, but not any of those mid-block crossings along that roadway. What I anticipate, and there's a new device called the Hawk coming out. They just installed them on Park Boulevard. They're probably coming to 4th Street and Gulf to Bay next. Not quite sure if it's going to make it the next couple of years, but they're mid-block crossings for higher speed roadways. And with Gulf to Bay and all the pedestrian crossings along that corridor, it's a great location to install those, and we'll talk about those in a minute. How about parking lots? Anybody walk in parking lots, go to the shopping mall or in public? You don't really think about when you're walking in the parking lot, what's the safest location for you? What do you think the safest location to walk in a parking lot is, in the middle or next to the cars that are parked?
In the middle.
In the middle. The middle is. Now, why do you think the middle is the safest location?
Get out of the way.
Gives you a distance of 10 to 12 feet. It also gives you, the drivers, a better vantage point to see you. Cars with camera systems, sometimes if you're walking right up against the car, somebody doesn't see you because you're concealed behind the seat pillar of their car, if you're stepping behind. So if you create that distance, the car begins to suddenly back up. You have 8 to 10 feet to get out of the way of that vehicle. So it's something to consider if you're walking just in the public shopping center. Where do you walk? Do you walk next to those parked cars, or do you walk in the middle? We recommend you walk in the middle. Creates a greater distance and a better vantage point for those drivers that are backing up to see you. Impairment is a huge factor. As a matter of fact, 35% of the crashes involve impairment on the part of the pedestrian. Okay? I worked traffic homicide for many, many years, and I saw this. Not only 70% at night, but 70% of those, probably 60% of those were impaired. Okay? So impairment is a huge factor with pedestrians. We always recommend, that they find a safe place, stay out of the roadway, stay off the sidewalks. And law enforcement has some tools to assist them to get back to the homeless shelters and things like that, to transport. Sidewalks. There's actually a state law that says if there's a sidewalk, you're required to use it. You can actually get a ticket for walking in the roadway if sidewalks are adjacent to that roadway. They spend millions of dollars in infrastructure building those sidewalks. It's the safest place for pedestrians to be, and that's what you need to utilize. It's when there are no sidewalks, you're forced to walk along the roadway, you're required to face that on traffic. Always expect the unexpected when you're walking. So don't look down, don't think about what you're gonna do that afternoon, because that right turning car that we just talked about is a huge factor. These aren't catastrophic collisions, they're minor in nature. They're 5 to 15 mile an hour impacts. The problem is there's a lot of them. That car that's turning right on a red light, that fails to look to the right to see if a pedestrian's in the crosswalk, they accelerate forward to shoot into the gap of traffic. Pedestrian, they never see in the crosswalk, and they hit them. It's a very common crash.
I've only lived around here for a couple of years, but I'm starting to suspect there's a law against using your turn signals. Because I will look, and if I see somebody, I won't challenge them. But almost every time I cross the street, someone doesn't signal and comes flying at me.
Yeah, the state law says you're required to do it when you change your direction. Why people don't use it, I don't know. I think it's easy.
Saving it for future.
Sometimes, how many times have you tried to use your turn signal, as soon as you put it on, the car behind you speeds up, there's a lot of inconsiderate driving. 70% of the crashes involving pedestrians are male, 32 to 54 years of age. Typically males take inherent risks. Jaywalking, very common, they don't want to walk to the crosswalks. So walk-wise stands for wearing bright clothes, reflective clothing. Always be alert, looking left, right, and left again. Know your surroundings. Obviously, it's very important when you're walking. Watch for cars in parking lots, walk in the middle. Impaired behavior that can be hazardous, stay on the sidewalks. If there's a sidewalk in place, make sure you're using it. And always expect the unexpected. As a pedestrian, you have to look out for those cars. Just because you have the right of way is not going to help you if you end up in the hospital with serious injuries. You have to expect the unexpected. You always have to know your surroundings. All right? So now let's talk about some important tips on bicycling. Like I said earlier, there's 18 guys.
Can I just ask you a question
Sure.
about sidewalks?
Sure.
And if I need to go somewhere else, I'll be glad to do that.
Sure.
On Clearwater Beach, there's a construction site that has now covered the walkway on the one side of the street.
Okay.
And so there's no crosswalk right there on either side. You have to literally go down a further block to get a crosswalk across to the other side of the street. Is that legal for them to block off the construction site, to totally block off the sidewalk?
Well, they would have to do an MOT, which is, they have to show the method of travel. So what they would do if they're gonna close off a sidewalk, they have to properly post it, and they have to offer alternative routes, sidewalks closed, detour routes. They'll typically have you cross the street at a crosswalk, walk the roadway that's parallel to it, and then cross back over the roadway. So additional steps to get through it.
Okay, and if you don't see that, who do you talk to about that?
I would recommend probably getting in touch with Clearwater Code Enforcement or whoever's in charge of their building.
Thank you.
All right, so in Florida, bicycle riding on a sidewalk must yield to pedestrians. Somebody mentioned this or talked about this John did here. So, what do you think? In Florida, bicyclists riding on a sidewalk must yield to a pedestrian. Is it true? Is it false or free if you don't know? 1, 2, or 3? Go ahead and respond with your answers. Just waiting on a couple more responses. All right, 81% of you say it's true, and it is true. A pedestrian on a sidewalk has a right of way. A bicyclist can legally operate on a sidewalk unless there's an ordinance that prohibits them from doing that. Now, that would have to be clearly posted. I'm not sure if there's an ordinance prohibiting you from riding a bicycle on a sidewalk, but I know the city of Tampa Bay. And they provide cycling tracks, bicycle lanes, and things of that nature. So a bicycle traveling on a sidewalk, when they approach him who's walking, legally what they are required to do is give an audible signal, ring a bell, or say passing on the left. They are required to do that. Okay? The bicyclist is required to yield to the pedestrian that's walking on the sidewalk. Now, as soon as that bicycle leaves the sidewalk and enters the roadway, they become a vehicle. Okay, we're going to talk about traffic, or 3 if you don't know. 1, 2, or 3. I gave you a little hint before this question came up. Just waiting on one more response. All right, 100% have this correct. A bicyclist is a vehicle and is required to travel in the same direction as traffic. Required to occupy the right-hand shoulder of the roadway or bicycle lane. They're required to stop at stop signs and red lights. Okay? They are a vehicle, and they can be ticketed for those offenses. Agencies in Florida, in Clearwater, Largo, St. Pete, they have HVE grant money from the Federal Highway Administration. So the Federal Highway Administration has pumped money into local law enforcement agencies, hiring police officers off duty to go out and do nothing but write tickets to pedestrians and bicyclists and vehicles who fail to yield to them. They're going to change behaviors of pedestrians, bicyclists, and motor vehicles through enforcement actions. We're here to educate you. When you leave here, you'll know what you're supposed to do, and if you don't do that, the law enforcement's going to follow up with some stiff fines and penalties and write citations for those. So we're trying to change the behavior through education. If that doesn't work, then obviously enforcement is the second means to do that.
I think we need to change the behavior of having these 2.5-minute lights.
Well,
Expect the bicycle to stop and wait.
We live in the most congested county, and we are on a system that basically they're monitoring with all those camera systems the flow of traffic. So high volume roadways will get longer signals than lower volume roadways, and it's designed to move traffic efficiently. But yeah, there's a lot of folks living here. Our roadways are at capacity. There's not much right of way to acquire to build bigger roadways. I guess all you could do is elevate additional roadways, and there's a huge cost associated with it. So speaking about bicycles being vehicles, can you wear earbuds or earphones on a bicycle? You know, only one ear could be covered. How many people is a bicycle designed to carry? One seat per rider, 2 seats, 2 riders. Can't ride on the handlebars, can't ride on the foot pegs. You're required to have brakes capable of stopping on a flat level surface. And a vehicle has turn signals, bicycles don't, therefore they're required to use hand signals. So as drivers, do you know those hand signals? When a bicyclist is approaching a red light, he holds his hand up like this, do you know what that means?
Right.
It's a right-hand turn. This is a left, this is a right, and this is slower stop. And if you don't know that, you think this is a left-hand turn, and you're passing them when a crash occurs, you won't crash, okay? So it's equally as important that drivers know those hand signals that bicyclists use, because they don't have turn signals like you have in your car. Okay? And there's a requirement when you pass that bicyclist to give a certain distance. Does anyone know what that distance is?
3 feet.
3 feet. 3 feet minimum. Okay? 3 feet minimum. There's nothing wrong with giving them 4, 5, 6 feet or a full lane, but you're required to give 3 feet. Okay, that's greater than an arm's length. Question?
Yeah, it was, let's see, last Friday it was, I was traveling north on Bay Shore,
Okay.
which, goes up the east side of the city.
Okay.
I pulled out and pulled behind a bicyclist who was riding down the middle of the northbound lane,
Okay.
not on the curb, but dead center in the middle of the lane, all the way up to 7th Avenue or 7th Street in Safety Harbor. Double line for me all the way, it's curvy, it was not safe for me to pass, so I just sort of.
Question. All right, so I don't know, maybe my friends at Clearwater PD can help me out with this. That particular road on Bay Shore, is that a share road?
It is, yes.
Okay, so, it's called a share road. So let's talk about a share road. I don't have an illustration on this presentation, something I cover in a high school presentation.
Can
But
you
a share
spell
road is
it?
that bicycle imprint,
Did you say share or share?
share road.
Share row.
How do you spell it?
No, there's
Sounds
a
like we're
paved,
saying
there's a
share it.
paved, like probably 6-foot bicycle path.
Yeah.
It's sidewalk
Okay.
that goes from State Road 60 all the way through almost to where the Safety Harbor Pier is.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's, it's a 2-lane
So-
center, it's, no, so it's not
Okay,
a, it's
so
not a
that,
designated
yes,
area.
his actions would be illegal, he's required to occupy the right-hand shoulder, but I was mentioning a roadway called a share road. And
That's
there
right.
are some in downtown Clearwater, it's that bicycle imprint in the center of the roadway, and it says share the road. When you see that sign, when you see that bicycle imprint in the center of the roadway, that tells the bicyclist they're entitled to use the full lane. You can't blow your horn at them, you can't pass them in a no passing zone. You're required to share the roads with them, okay? That's the difference between a share road. But on a roadway where there's a bicycle path, if they decide they're gonna ride in the roadway as a vehicle, they have to occupy the right-hand shoulder of that roadway.
Okay.
They can't ride more than 2 abreast. Excellent. All right, these are bicycle lanes, and we always tell folks, if you can't remember which direction you're supposed to ride, every bicycle lane here in Florida has that arrow. It points in the direction in which they're required to travel with the flow of traffic, okay? Bike lights, huge, huge factor. A lot of crashes with bicyclists occur at night. Number one cause not being seen. A lot of bicyclists don't know that they are required to have a front light, white in color, visible from 500 feet, and a red tail light visible from 600 feet. Right? Both lights, you can't just choose one. You can't ride around with your cell phone with a little white light. That doesn't fly either. Okay? They get creative out there, folks. Right? And it's essential because not only does it allow them to see where they're going, if they're on a dark roadway where there are no sidewalks or there are no street lights, they're traveling as a vehicle in that roadway on the right-hand shoulder, it gives you as drivers a clear view of them 600 feet in advance from the rear. Red light visible, gets you prepared for what you need to do. You know you're required to give them a minimum of 3 feet on a dark roadway. You're probably gonna switch lanes if there's an additional lane and give them a full lane. But the problem is most bicyclists that travel around without headlights or taillights, they probably don't have reflectors, they're not wearing bright colored clothing, and a lot of them fall victims to being struck by cars because they never see them until the last moment. And impairment's a huge factor on bicycles as well, okay? A lot of people don't think you can get a DUI on a bicycle, but you can, all right? You'll see these banners on the back of police cars here in the Tampa Bay area. It says, share the road, it's the law, 3 feet. It's designed to remind drivers that when you pass a bicyclist, you are required to give that distance of 3 feet. All right? So now let's test your knowledge. Let's see what you remember. Where sidewalks are not provided, a pedestrian should do what? Walk in the same direction as traffic or walk facing traffic? 1 or 2. 1 or 2. Waiting on one more response. There we go. All right, 90% of you answered walk facing traffic, and that is the correct answer. Always as a pedestrian, you're required to face traffic. And the reason for it gives you the ability to step out of the path of that vehicle. A car doesn't slow down or move over for you, right? A bicyclist must ride in the same direction as traffic. True or false? Bicyclist in a roadway required to ride in the same direction as traffic. True or false? All right, it is true. Everybody got 100% on that?
We didn't talk about why. I mean, I've been ready to pull out of a stop sign and that would fight come
Okay.
out of nowhere, you know.
Okay. A bicyclist on a sidewalk is a pedestrian. Remember, the only requirement they have is to yield to you when you're walking, but as soon as that bicycle leaves the roadway, leaves the sidewalk, enters the roadway, they're a vehicle. They don't need a driver's license, but they're required to follow all the same rules and regulations as you. Stop at stop signs, stop at red lights, because they're traveling in the same roadway that you are as a motor vehicle. So if we had bicyclists traveling in the roadway and they didn't stop at stop signs, but you were required to, we'd have a lot of crashes, wouldn't we? So the state uniform requirements are that if you ride in the roadway, you follow the same rules as drivers.
Yeah, but the practical, whatever the law is, one practical reason is that, you know, the left, right, left business.
Yes.
If you're driving, that's what you do, just as though you're crossing the street. But if someone is riding in the opposite direction, in the opposite direction from traffic, they pop out from behind.
So are you referring to the bicyclist that's not riding with the flow of traffic, they're riding against the
Yeah,
flow of
right.
traffic?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a ticketable offense, okay? Now, if a bicyclist doesn't feel safe riding in a roadway with their backs to traffic, I always offer them the opportunity to ride on the sidewalk, okay? But they need to consider some of the other issues that come along with riding your bicycle on the sidewalk. See, the reason they made bicycle lanes, put bicycles in the roadway with traffic, is because design engineers weren't working very well with the traffic engineers. What we used to have, the public sign that sat on a 30-foot pole now sits on a monument sign about this tall. And then as they develop properties, they try to keep everything as close as they can. CVS wants you to park as close to the front door as possible. Make it as convenient as possible, so they'll push all their parking close to the business. And there's requirements for landscape buffers. Well, guess where all those landscape buffers go? Right along the edge of the sidewalk. And it looks good when the business first opens and the bushes are about 1.5 feet tall. But what happens when those bushes aren't maintained, or that oak tree now has a canopy that sits lower than it should? They become side triangle issues. So a person riding a bicycle on a sidewalk at 15 or 20 miles per hour, have you ever tried to pull out of a business where you actually had to encroach the entire sidewalk to even see if somebody was on it?
Yep.
Maybe because of a wall or a vinyl fence in your neighborhood. It's common just about everywhere you look. So the reason it's safer for bicyclists in the roadway is it keeps them exposed to traffic. If they ride in the same direction, most drivers will look for them in that same direction because they're always focused looking to the left. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
All right. When riding a bicycle on the sidewalk, the bicyclist must yield to people walking on the sidewalk, give an audible signal warning when passing people that are walking. 3, watch for posted signs where bicycling on a sidewalk may be prohibited. Or 4, all of the above. 1, 2, 3, or 4, if you could respond. All right, 95% got that correct. It's all of them. Remember, we talked about this, that bicycle on the sidewalk, what their requirements are. They're required to do all 3 of those. So all the above is the most appropriate answer. What do you believe is the most important behavior you can practice when walking? So this is an opinionated question. I think they're all important, but what do you believe is the most important? Don't drink and walk. Wear bright colors. Be alert and expect the unexpected. Or cross at a crosswalk. We talked about all these as important factors, but what do you believe is the most important? All right, 76% say be alert and expect the unexpected. And I can't disagree with you on that because it's so important as a pedestrian, a vulnerable roadway user. You don't have the protection you do in a car with a seatbelt and airbag and 4 steel doors surrounding you. So if you get hit by a car you're vulnerable to some serious injuries, okay? So you really need to be alert and always expect the unexpected. Expect that somebody's out driving, they may be impaired by prescription medication, they may be on their cell phone, they may be engaged in a conversation so focused on something else besides you walking or attempting to cross a roadway. So I can't disagree, I think you looking out, expecting the unexpected is one of the most important things you can do. What do you believe is the most important behavior you can practice when driving? What do you believe is the most important behavior when you're out driving? Don't text and drive, stop on red when making that right-hand turn, follow the speed limits, or don't drink and drive. 1 through 4, all important. What do you believe is the most important? All right, 41% is the highest, don't drink and drive. 36% say don't text and drive. Distractions are just as much of a factor of taking away your focus from the roadway as impairment, right? And stopping on red before making that right-hand turn. There's far too many crashes as a result of that, people not paying attention, looking to the right, looking for that pedestrian in the crosswalk. So take the extra second and look to the right before you turn. All right? Please rate the overall presentation. You won't hurt my feelings. If you learned something here, you think it's great, one correction all the way 5 to go.
George,
Yes,
can I ask why you never mentioned helmets?
helmets, because I don't think there's anyone under 16 in the room there, but the requirement is.
Only because as a nurse, I consider you therefore an
Yes.
organ donor
Yes.
if you don't wear a helmet. It's true. No,
Well,
it's
the
true.
state law requires that if you're under 16, you're required to wear a helmet. Anyone over than that, but I can tell you, I had, one of my canine officers back in the day, he was out riding on the pedestrian, fell off his bike, and he got a concussion, he had to work for him 7 weeks. So even as adults, we fall off bikes, people pull out in front of us, and you really need to protect, you know, that head of yours, and brain injuries and skull fractures cause a lot of, as you know, traumatic brain injuries as a result of simply falling off of a bicycle. All right, so the rest of these are just demographics, your gender, if you could please indicate that. It's not open yet, bear with me just a moment, and I'll tell you when you can enter that. Go ahead and do that now.
Boy, are you old. Okay, Homer, if you brought your dog to the presentation.
And she would know all these things. She's very clever.
All right, the last one will be your age. I won't know why you're responding, hang on, it just takes a moment, though. It's not open yet, bear with me just a
We're all
minute.
underage.
Okay, you can go ahead and answer now.
Still the same answer.
It doesn't. USF's into gathering statistical information, it doesn't populate those numbers. All right, and last one is your education level. Number 6, if you prefer not to answer. Hang on just a moment, you can go ahead and do that now. All right, now we're all gonna raise our right hand, take the pledge. I pledge to walk wise, bike smart, drive safe, and spread the word about the importance of safe behavior to my friends, family, neighbors, colleagues. This is really important. If you learn something here, if you see somebody doing something unsafe, share with them why it's probably more important to them to walk facing traffic rather than walking with their backs to traffic. Because if we could just educate more people, pedestrians, that being the second leading cause of fatalities, think of the number of deaths we could save just in the state of Florida alone. Just knowledge of the laws and regulations of what is the smartest and the safest thing for you to do as a pedestrian. So yes, if you're interested in becoming an ambassador to these are some different websites, and we have Twitter, Facebook, and as a matter of fact, if you want to pose for a Facebook photo, we can do that as well, but I'm sure you have other subject matter here you want to get going on your meeting. Any questions, things that we talked about, rules, regulations and stuff that talked about here?
Sort of a question.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to take this and post this in my neighborhood, website.
Okay.
Some of this, do you have something that we can do to post?
Yes, if you could, contact, Julie will send you all that information if you could just, and Brent, he's got all the information,
Okay.
we'll get all that to you. Probably be printed in your minutes, right? Any other questions? Yes, ma'am?
Setbacks, I'm noticing, that, a lot of problems with setbacks that aren't adequate, and you can't see people, if you're making a turn.
Yes.
Who should you report that to?
Well, first of all, what's the setback?
Okay, it has to be.
Site triangle issues is what we're talking, remember we talked about, I spoke briefly about, you're trying to leave a business, maybe a Dunkin' Donuts or a Starbucks, and now the bushes with a sign that used to sit on a 30-foot pole now sits on a monument. And now you can't see behind that big CVS or public sign, and you'll never see that bicyclist that's riding 15 or 20 miles per hour up the sidewalk, so you pull forward to look to see if anybody's on the sidewalk, and then a bicyclist comes and hits the front of your car, flies over the hood of your car. So those are some of the issues. Traffic engineers struggle with design engineers coming up with a plan, so traffic engineers came up with a bicycle lane to address that issue. Put bicycles in the roadway, put them with traffic, it's a safer location for them to have their own lane and a bicycle lane. And typically, if they're riding with the flow of traffic, drivers that are always focused on looking for that gap in traffic will be more likely to see them as well. So I would say that would start somewhere with the city design engineers who are getting permits to go do it. But it's not just here in Clearwater, it's everywhere. It's in Pasco County, it's throughout the state. Question?
The rapid flashing beacon on
RPs, yes.
crosswalks.
Yes.
I think I heard you say that if the beacon is flashing, you're required to come to a full stop before progressing through it, is that correct?
Yes, for the pedestrian, you're required to come, if there's a pedestrian crossing that roadway, you come to a stop at the stop bar that's provided in front of that crosswalk.
If there's no pedestrian there, if you've seen that they've made it across the sidewalk,
Then you have to, at that point, you proceed to yield. Now, the Hawk, which I mentioned, is not here yet. There are plenty in Hillsborough County. They just installed a bunch on Park Boulevard. They go live, I think, on the 12th of this month. It's just like that RFB. It's a different device, though. It's a unique traffic signal. It's 3 heads. It's 2 that sit on top of one in a diamond pattern. And it starts off the same way. The pedestrian pushes the button. This is a mid-block crossing on higher speed roadways, 40, 45 mile an hour roads. Multiple lanes. Bush Boulevard, Hillsborough Avenue, a few of those places, and Park Boulevard, as I just mentioned. So the pedestrian pushes the button, it starts flashing yellow. After it stops flashing yellow, it turns solid yellow, then solid red. At that point it turns solid red, it's treated just like a traffic light. It's a red light, if you pass by that stop. It doesn't matter whether there's a pedestrian on that leg of the roadway or not. You're required to come to a complete stop and remain stopped until the signal changes, and the next activation will be flashing red lights. That says once you've come to a complete stop and you've determined there's no longer a pedestrian on that leg of the roadway, you can proceed with caution, just like you would right on red after stopping an intersection. Clear? Question?
the follow-up to that is, would you discuss the legislation that's being proposed in Tallahassee to eliminate the rapid flashing?
That's a great question. So, those of you who aren't aware, they're trying to change the RFBs to a flashing red. And if that happens, with the infrastructure in place just in Pinellas County, it's gonna cost millions of dollars to switch all those RFBs out from yellow to red. So, we're hoping that doesn't become law, because if it is, I think what will happen is you'll see a lot of those disappear. The cost associated with changing or restructuring those signals to all flashing red lights is just gonna, there's no money in the budgets, I don't think, to do that, so we'll have to see what happens.
I'd like to just bring to your attention for something that may happen in the future here.
Okay.
The city council has just recently approved a vehicle called a pedal pump, which can be on Clearwater Beach, south of the roundabout, and on North Clearwater Beach, and then also in the downtown area. And they're fitted for 16 people to be on this pedal thing with, I guess, a driver
Right.
in the front. And,
And a bar.
and it's a bar.
It's a bar on a bicycle, and hopefully the guy who's steering the bicycle is not consuming alcohol with the rest.
But I just bring that up because the rules as they relate to bicycles, I don't know how it's gonna relate to this thing.
Well, if it's operated by human power, it's obviously still a pedicycle, but yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, they rent different bicycles at parks where they have 4 people in them that are pedaling. So I think they'll need to clarify the definitions and the limitations and requirements of those specifically. But I wouldn't see, you'll see those devices come out far before the laws are created. It usually takes a couple of years for those laws to be created after those become. Yeah, we saw that with the GoPeds, with the gas, with the weed eater motor attached to a skateboard. We saw those things. It took 2-3 years for clarification to come out of those laws. Any other questions?
Thank you
Thank you all
very much.
very much.
Lieutenant, just a question. Does the police department give out bicycle lights anymore? They used to. I don't know if they still do.
We don't have any that we purchased. I know some have gotten some donations. I know that Mr. Chapman has provided some, but as a regular, we don't have any. We don't have any stock of that. Same with bicycle helmets. We don't do that, and we don't have DOT approved bike helmets.
Yeah.
To give out at places, so no.
I wasn't sure because at one point they used to give them away quite a bit.
Every now and then, if we have them, we do,
Yeah.
but it's not.
It's not there as a standard anymore. Thanks.
Our next speaker is Officer Heredia, who's going to give us a brief overview of crime and police activity in the city of Clearwater.